Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the rural housing breakout session. Just a few reminders before we get started. This session is being recorded, and reminder to keep all microphones muted. Any questions for our presenters may be submitted in the chat box. However, due to time limitations, if we are unable to answer the questions during the presentations, questions will be answered on our website. I'd like to get started with our speakers. Our presenters today are from USDA Rural Development. Our speakers are Mr. Alan Linebright, who is the Director for the Single Family Housing Program, and Mr. Jonathan Bell, who is the Director for the Multifamily Housing Program. Our first speaker is Mr. Alan Linebright.
All right, there we go. Hey, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and we'll go ahead and dive in. What we're going to do is really kind of a 100,000-foot overview of a couple of our single-family housing programs and talk about maybe a few examples there towards the end if we have time. If you go ahead and go to the next slide. So here's the three programs that we're going to get into. What we refer to as a Section 502 direct loan program, our 504 loan, and a 504 grant program. And again, we're just going to hit the high points here today. So next slide, please. So in what we refer to as our direct 502 program is where an applicant comes directly to USDA Rural Development for financing. We have offices across the state, across the nation. And again, we sit as the loan officer, we service it, we cradle to grave that loan product. And essentially what we're doing here is a fixed rate loan for 33 years. We don't have a prepayment penalty. Our current interest rate is a phenomenal rate of 2.5%. That'll be good through at least September 1. We don't know at that time if it's going to change or not. But then we also have a provision in there where we can provide some payment assistance to anyone who might qualify. The lower their income, the more chance they have to qualify for that payment assistance. And we can do that down to as low as 1% interest. We review that on an annual basis to determine if we need to raise or lower the amount of payment assistance up to that cap of whatever their note rate is. Again, right now, 2.5%. We can do 100% financing if there's no funds available. If they have over 7,500 in assets, we would have a requirement for a down payment. But typically, we don't have a down payment requirement. And then if you look at that next bullet there, you'll see we can even loan some closing costs. So it's possible that somebody could move in for zero out-of-pocket expenses into a new home. We're doing this without charging private mortgage insurance, as some of the conventional lenders do out there on 100% finance products. Kind of two key parts is that we do have a loan limit that's going to vary by county. 254 counties here in the state of Texas. We have about 60 different loan limits out there. We have some counties that share a loan limit, but it does vary by county. Those income limits also vary by county, and they vary by family size. What we call income banding. It's a family of 1 to 4 and a family of 5 to 8 is how we set our income limits up. And again, those are by county. We do have a method that somebody could do a little pre-qualification there, and you can see the link there at the bottom, eligibility.sc.egov. You can find a link in there. You can go in there, type in somebody's income, and it'll tell you approximately what they would qualify for. And it'll also give a link to our eligible area map. We are a little bit unique, is that our programs are restricted to rural towns and rural communities. Typically, we say a town population 10,000 or less. It gets a little more complicated as you get near the metropolitan areas. Next slide, please. If the income's a little bit higher, we have what we call a guaranteed 502 loan. In that one, a lot of the same requirements, just a higher income bracket. Just to kind of give you an idea, the direct loan program, family of 4 in Collin County could make about $60,000 a year. That same family of 4 in Collin County could make about $80,000 a year and qualify for our guaranteed loan program. The difference in that program is that they are actually applying through a bank or a mortgage company for the funds. Still do the 100% financing. Still, we don't charge private mortgage insurance on that one. Little variance there is that there's no loan limit in that program. It's dictated by true repayment ability and what the applicant can qualify for. Same eligible areas there as our direct loan program. Next slide, please. So one of our requirements is that the home must be considered modest. So we do have a few features that the home cannot have. One of those being an in-ground swimming pool. It also cannot have income producing structures. Uh, it's okay if somebody's in the childcare business, craft production, those sorts of things. But if they're going to run an auto body shop out of the shop in the back, it wouldn't be an eligible purpose. Typically, in our direct loan program, we say square footage is limited to 2,000 square feet. We do have some potentials where we can waive that. We don't do it very often, but there are some potentials there. But again, typically, we're going to say modest house is 2,000 square feet or less, and that's gross living area. Now, if we're looking at our guaranteed loan program, again, no size limit on that one and no square footage limitation in that program. Next slide. Why use this? This is our mission, is to provide funding to home buyers that are unable to obtain private credit. So, with the ability to do the 100% financing, the ability to provide some payment assistance, we're dealing with a little bit different client than the bank would normally deal with. Typically, our credit criteria is a little more relaxed. That doesn't mean that they can have bad credit. It just means there's some things that maybe we might overlook that a private lender might not overlook. Little or no down payment. What a great option there. Even if they have funds available, again, unless it's over 7,500, we don't require them to put those funds into the property. One of the keys on home ownership and being a successful homeowner is having the ability to overcome a hiccup. So if we allow them to hang on to some of that cash, then sometimes they can, overcome the air conditioner going down. They have that cash available to pay for those expenses. And then, the ability to subsidize that payment is something that gives them the ability to potentially get in a little bit larger house, or maybe even something that's truly safe, decent, and affordable for them. Next slide, please. So what can we use funds for? Typically anything that goes into that property. If we're talking about a new construction home, the site-related cost, purchasing that home, paying for the utilities, grading, we can, it doesn't make us a difference whether we're doing new construction or existing homes. All of those would be eligible expenses. If we needed to do some type of specially designed feature for the handicap, if you wanted to add some energy savings things in there, those would all be eligible cost if needed. Creditworthiness. I mentioned a little bit earlier that our credit criteria might be a little bit more lax than the private industry out there. Here's what we're trying to determine is, do they have the ability and willingness to meet their obligations? So that ability, do they have income availability? Is it reliable income? From a willingness standpoint, we're looking at their payment history. Typically, we're going to put a lot of focus on the last 3 years. We get a little bit concerned when they do have outstanding collection judgments, but if they have satisfactory payments arrangements for those, we would ignore those. We also have a provision in there where we can actually waive our credit criteria. So maybe they do have some outstanding collection accounts, but we can tie that to a significant event. Probably the best example we have going on right now is the COVID-19 crisis, that maybe they were furloughed for a given period of time, and so they had some late payments as a result of that furlough. As long as we can tie their credit issues to the furlough, then we could waive our credit criteria in order to make a loan. A few other requirements in there: they can't currently own a home. Now, if they're going to sell their home, that's acceptable. We can do some refinances in limited circumstances. It's not typically something that we do. There's a bullet there that says unable to obtain credit elsewhere. if they have the credit, they have the cash reserves, they have the job history to go down to a mortgage company or bank, that could eliminate them from eligibility with us. Of course, they have to personally occupy the dwelling, be of legal capacity to incur the debt, not be suspended or debarred from doing business with the government. Uh, they need to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. There are some instances where we can do non-citizens. We'll take those on a case-by-case basis and make a determination real early in the process. And of course, have the willingness and ability to repay that loan. Next slide, please. 504 loans and grants. This is one that rarely will you hear me talk about anything that I don't mention the 504 loan and grant program. It's a phenomenal program for those that qualify. Of course, the key phrase out there, grant, that's the one everybody's always interested in, and we'll talk about it here in just a second. But this is for those that own their home, and it's can be used for repairs to their home. If we're doing a loan, we're going to do a 1% interest loan for 20 years, makes it an extremely affordable payment for somebody that is very low income. We do have a potential in there for grant funding as long as we're doing health and safety repairs. So there's a lot of things we can tie into health and safety: the roof, the septic, electrical, handicap, accessibility, sometimes the foundation, depending on the condition, sometimes flooring. It all depends on the condition of those items. To be eligible for grant funding, they have to be very low income and they have to be 62 years of age or older. And of course, as I mentioned in the first bullet there, owning their home. If we're looking at a 504 loan, we do just a kind of a minimal review of credit. As long as they've been making their primary housing expenses on time, we can typically get them qualified under that 504 loan program. Currently, you'll see out there in a lot of the materials, it says a maximum grant $7,500 with a maximum loan of $20,000. Texas currently has a pilot program going, and we can go up to $10,000 in grant funds. So we can do a lot of good with grant funds to those that qualify. Now, loan, a lot of our elderly don't want to borrow money on the property. One of the selling points for us is if we do a loan less than $7,500, we don't take a lien on their property. So sometimes that's enough to get one of our elderly applicants over the hump and understand that it's okay to borrow money, because they certainly hate to put that lien back on a property that they've paid for. So here's a few examples of some stuff we've done. Peters family, you see they did a little bit of work on this one themselves. Well, we featured them during Home Ownership Month last month. Smith family, this is one of my favorite ones. North Texas couple here purchased this home. This family here happens to be survivors of Hurricane Katrina, and then we were fixing to close on their home when the Texas shut down to the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of uncertainty of if we were actually going to be able to pull this off. But we did what was referred to as a drive-by closing, and got this loan closed, and certainly a great and deserving family for this home in North Texas. Next slide, please. Hernandez family, beautiful home right there down in South Texas. So, we've seen kind of 3 different homes, one with a repair, one an existing home, and here's a new home here. Next slide, please. And then here's one more that we've closed. The bragging point there for them, perfect way in every way, exceeding their expectations on what their first house in the United States would look like. What a great testimony to some of our immigrant families here. That's all I've got. If there's any questions, stick them in the chat box. We'd love to answer them. If we can't get to them, we'll certainly figure out a way to get those answers out. My contact information's out there, and please let us know how we can help your communities. Thank you.
So our next presenter is Mr. Jonathan Bell.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. As I mentioned, I'm Jonathan Bell, Multifamily Housing Program Director in Texas. And a little bit of background on how we're currently set up. Alan alluded to is we have 25 area offices scattered throughout Texas that cover all 254 counties. And then I'm located in the Temple State office. So that's kind of our structure to where in our field offices, they administer all of our programs, single family, multifamily, and the rest. So today I'm going to just cover our multifamily housing programs, which is what we oversee in the state office for the entire state. So we can go to our next slide. We'll show you what programs we're going to overview. So our core programs, we have 5 of them. We'll go through each of them and give you kind of an overview of what each of them do. We can go through how you can apply for them if you're interested in doing that, and we can try to answer any questions that you may have as we go through. But first one is our direct loan program. We'll get into more detail on that. We have our MPR. We have loan and grants to construct or repair farm labor housing. We also provide housing preservation grants, and then we do multifamily housing loan guarantees. So we can go to our next slide. We'll start talking about the 515 program in a little more detail. We can kind of go through this fairly quickly. I just wanted to highlight, that we do have this 515 program. What has happened over the past several years is that this particular program has not been funded probably since the late 1990s to where there was adequate funding to actually construct new buildings. The program has received funding, but it has been redirected to actually rehabbing, revitalizing the existing portfolio. But back in the day, so to speak, this was heavily used as direct financing to construct multifamily housing units. And those developers would get some sort of interest credit subsidy. So there was a note rate, just like Alan was mentioning in the single family program, and their mortgage interest rate could be reduced all the way down to 1% by going through our program. And then they also had the ability to apply and receive rental assistance, which is project based, to where those tenants living in those units would pay up to 30% of their income, and that rental assistance would cover the rest. And so what has happened, of course, over the years, Texas at one point, I think, had close to 800 properties. Maybe that's a little too much, maybe in like the mid 700s in our heyday. And currently today we sit at 626. Which is still the most in the nation, and we're a little over 22,000 units. And like I said, in the 515 program, our primary focus has been on rehabbing them. So we've had the ability to have a rule set aside with Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. We've worked very well with them and maintained a rural set aside within their 9% tax credit program for many years now. And so we're heavily involved in processing those transfers of ownership, which is typically what will come into us with when a developer actually receives 9% tax credits. And on a given year, we'll do anywhere from 10 to 15 of those deals. And that's pretty steady since we do have that set aside. Now, what has happened in the most recent 2 or 3 years is we have seen a lot more utilization of the 4% bonds, and we've actually closed 2 of those deals. One was a 16 property portfolio deal, and we just recently last month closed a 21 property 4% bond deal. And so that's, as far as this program is concerned, that's what we're most heavily involved with at this point. the little amount of funding that does go into the 515 program is usually redirected to the MPR. And so if we could change the slide, we'll talk about that next. So the MPR program is actually still a demonstration. It was, I think, came out in 2010, 2011, maybe a little earlier than that, but it's administered through a NOSA. And so that NOSA is published in the Federal Register, and it outlines the parameters of the program. And really that's for an existing rural development owner to apply for funding to revitalize their property. And so when they do that, there's a number of tools that we can provide to them, which include grants, no interest loans, soft second or bullet loans, and debt deferrals. And so what would typically happen is we a lot of the time see this MPR program coupled with the 515 program that we just talked about, where an applicant will come in, developer will come in, and they've obtained 9% tax credits. They'll apply for a transfer of ownership to rehab that property. And then they'll also apply for an MPR to receive any third-party gap financing that is needed or to defer their debt. And so through that debt deferral, they can defer their mortgage payment for up to 20 years, which allows that money then to go back into the project to either keep the rents low and cover any third-party debt, or go just directly into hard costs and rehabbing the property. And so that's a two-stage application process. Typically, when that NOSA comes out, you'll submit an initial application, you'll get a notice to proceed, and then you'll submit a full application, which includes, a number of documents and a capital needs assessment, which will kind of give you a snapshot of what the issues are at the property, what needs to be immediately done, and then a scope of work would be developed based on that CNA. Currently, right now, I believe the NOSA is closed, and there is word, I think, within the next couple of months, there should be a new one coming out. So that's published in the Federal Register, and all of the application requirements, deadlines, so on and so forth are included within that document. So you'd want to look out for that. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go into our farm labor housing program. This is direct financing from us that can be used for new construction, repair, and rehab as well. And this is for either year-round or seasonal domestic farm laborers. In Texas right now, we have about 15 properties. They are all off farm. This program does have the ability to finance on farm labor housing. And several states around the nation have that, but in Texas, we've at this point have off farm labor housing. So that's what we currently have here. So this program is also administered through the NOSA process, which would come out in the Federal Register, outline, the amount of money that's available, when to apply, how to apply. It's then each state applications are then sent to the national office where they are scored and pooled, to where the money is then disseminated from there. Since it's usually an oversubscribed program, the score does come into play. And so what we see in here is that we can offer a 1% loan for 33 years on the loan side. And the grant side, there, of course, is no repayment on that. The grant can only be up to 90% of the total development cost, though. So there is still a 10% equity requirement there, although if you do get a loan and a grant, the loan can cover that 10% equity. And so, of course, this is for farm laborers, eligible farm laborers only, the housing, for low and very low income. And they can, and up to moderate, actually. And there's a definition of what a farm laborer is within our handbook to kind of outline all the various ways that someone could qualify for this housing. as of right now, there is no open NOSA on this, but we're in hopes that one will come out in the near future. If we can go to the next slide, please. Housing preservation grants. This is one to where we have money available to rehab either multifamily housing units, or what has typically happened in Texas is this has gone to rehab single family homes. So it's eligible for both of those purposes. And this is also a program that has a NOSA published in the Federal Register each year that solicits applications, to where, you know, entities such as nonprofits will come in and apply for these grants. They'll get a certain amount of money, and then they'll lend that or grant that to eligible applicants within their area to either rehab their single family homes or multifamily homes. This program in Texas is heavily used and always oversubscribed, and we'll typically you know, go back to the national office and ask for more money on this. It's you know, very active here in Texas. So we can move on to our next slide, please. So I believe this is the last program we're going to talk about. It's our guaranteed program, whereas the 515 side is directly through us. The 538 side is where you would actually go to a lender, an approved lender, and you would apply through their typical application process. They would underwrite the loan. They would come to a point to where they have a complete product. They would then send that over to our office to where they're asking for up to a 90% guarantee on that loan. And so, you know, different from this side or the 515 side or farm labor, where we're directly involved in the financing and the underwriting of the deal. These are packaged and come to us done to where we're kind of doing an overview of the deal to make sure it fits within our requirements and that we can offer that guarantee. And so this program, of course, the property has to be built within an eligible area. Same with the 515. Farm labor is our only program to where it does not have to be in an eligible area. That can be in any area that you choose, metro, etc., as long as there's a, you know, justified need for it in there. So what we see in the 538 is that we can go up to a 40-year term. The minimum is 25 years, and the interest rate is negotiated between you and the lender. We don't really get involved in that. And as you can see there, the income guidelines are much higher, just like on the single family side and their direct program, that's geared toward lower income individuals. Same to ours. And then in our guaranteed program, those are geared towards higher income earners. And so what we see in this is really our go-to program for new construction, since the 515 program is not really funded for that. So if you're looking for a new construction deal, our typical one that we'll see is an applicant or a developer will receive a 9% tax credits, and then they'll apply to us for, you know, some of that gap financing that they need to come in after construction has been completed. And so this program does currently have an open NOSA that I believe is open until 2021. So your first contact here, if you're interested, would be to go to that approved lender. We have approved lender list on our website to get the kind of the ball rolling, and they'll discuss your deal with you and walk through the eligibility requirements. And then, you know, like I said, we really, in that program, our clients typically the lender. And so we'll deal with them on getting your application through, obligated into a commitment. And so one kind of last thing I wanted to mention is we've seen more and more, finance deals to where they'll use all of these programs that I mentioned today. So you would have an existing 515 property. A developer will come in, apply for a transfer of ownership. They receive 9% tax credits. They'll also apply for an MPR to get a deferral or maybe some soft second money. And then there could be the potential that they'd also apply for a 538 loan. So you'd have all three of those programs involved on one deal. And we see that more and more, and it's been more of the norm. And so all of these programs can work together to get you to the finish line of revitalizing a property, hopefully for the next 15 or 20 years. I think that concludes the programs I was talking about. You can go to the next slide, but I think that's the end. So thank you again for inviting us. Appreciate the time that we had to speak about this. To contact for questions, you can just send those directly to me, and I can get those to the folks that needs to have it. They can get back in contact with you. Our website's very helpful. It has a list of all of our existing 515 properties on it, their locations, their contact information. If you or a tenant is interested in those properties, or if you're interested in buying or developing property, that's a good way to kind of figure out what's out there and what may be available. So with that, I think we're at the end, and we have a couple, I guess, looks like 10 minutes. We want to take questions, so I'll turn it back over.
Thank you both. And there are a few questions already in the chat box, but if anyone else has a question, if you can please submit those now. I know you might have answered some of the questions in the chat box, but I'm going to repeat those that way
Absolutely.
in case somebody else has the same question. The first question comes from Miss Aisha Cruz Reyes. Are individuals able to apply for the 504 themselves instead of through a third party? And are there any restrictions on where the repaired property can be located?
Absolutely. Our typical applicant does come directly to USDA. And there's no third party involved. There is a process if you're interested in becoming a packager for them that we can help you out there and become a packager for them. But our typical applicant applies directly to us. And as far as restrictions on where the repair property can be located, that eligible area map that I mentioned early on, and we can put I did put a link in the chat box to it. Again, eligibility.sc.egov.usda.gov. That's a mouthful, but if you type in eligible areas for rural development, it'll pop right up. And there's a map that you can zoom into your community or the state of Texas and figure out what's eligible and what's not.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Ms. Elaine Hernandez, and I'm not sure if you're able to answer this question or if it might be another rural development program, but how can we promote the development of home-based micro-enterprises like home gardens with food preparation, packaging, branding, and marketing?
Jonathan? I'll take it. I think the advice I'd give you would be to call the Texas Department of Agriculture. When you talk about marketing and branding in Texas, their Go Texan program is the program for doing that. As far as the packaging, branding, marketing, as far as home-based micro enterprises, I'd be at a loss, kind of put on the spot right now to come up with a source for that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Joyce Osborne. Can the 504 Loan and Grants Fund program be used for construction of handicap ramp for a senior living in a mobile home on their property?
The typical answer to that is yes. Handicap ramp would be eligible. When you throw in the word mobile, we change the answer to it depends, but typically yes, we can do that. Manufactured housing, mobile homes, they have to be on a permanent foundation. So if it's not, then the answer would be no. If it is, then the answer would be yes. But typically we can work through that.
One item to add to that last question about food preparation packaging, we do have what is called the summer food program, and it's probably not really an answer to that question, but just something to plug at this point is the summer food program is a collaboration between rural development and the Food Nutrition Service. And the way that we typically are involved in that is our multifamily housing properties are asked to be host sites. And so through a nonprofit food pantry, they will actually serve meals at our multifamily housing facilities, where most of our properties have some sort of common area, and actually serve meals throughout the summer for those kids that do not have access to school lunch. And so that's another program that we monitor and work closely with other agricultural agencies to administer. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. And we have a couple more questions. What is the process for lenders to become an approved 538 lender? And then what's the typical timeframe for applicants closing on a 502 or 504 loan?
The 538 lender question is, you can contact us at the state office. There's some documents we can provide. You would submit those documents, and then that you would submit them directly to the national office. They review and approve all the lenders. And so, but you could start with us. We could get you what you need to send to them.
All right, and then the time frame question, I like to give the great government answer there of it depends. Typically, 502 is going to be 60 to 90 days from start to finish on there. And a 504 loan, 504 grant, we've done those as fast as 20 days, and sometimes, depending on the contractor issues, may take 60 days on those.
Thank you. And I don't believe there are any other questions. So before we end, I just want to remind everybody that a recording of this presentation, as well as the slides, will be on the Summit website. So if you need to refer back to those, they will be there. And just before we conclude, I want to let everybody know the next sessions start at 11 o'clock, and the breakout sessions are community programs and on food insecurity. So you have a break until 11. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude the session on rural housing.